Welcome back to the sharpest, most unflinching perspectives on the U.S. Strategic Insight Channel. Ladies and gentlemen, turn off those polished mainstream reports from CNN, BBC, or Fox News right now. Throw away the carefully sanitized press releases that Pentagon generals are trying to feed the public with their calm, composed faces. What is truly unfolding across the Middle East at this moment is not some limited retaliatory operation, not a diplomatic warning shot, and certainly not another routine clash. We are standing at the epicenter of the most catastrophic geopolitical earthquake since World War II. A blood soaked verdict has just been delivered, officially sealing the coffin on the era of absolute American dominance. Human history has been ripped in two in just 120 seconds. Close your eyes and picture a quiet night in the Gulf region where America and its allies' massive military superbases, once considered impregnable fortresses, stood. Al Udeid in Qatar, Al Arifjan in Kuwait, and fortified outposts scattered across the deserts of Iraq and Syria. These were symbols of Washington's power, home to squadrons of cutting-edge fighter jets, towering radar networks controlling vast swaths of airspace across Europe and Asia, and tens of thousands of personnel wearing the stars and stripes. Yet that supreme arrogance was crushed to dust in a scenario so devastating that even the most reckless strategists in Arlington never dared imagine it. 120 seconds. That's right. In those brief 2 minutes, the night sky over the Middle East suddenly lit up with thousands of fiery trails tearing through the atmosphere like a meteor storm from hell. No warning sirens lasted long enough. No defense system could fully track the incoming death. 50 strategic military sites belonging to the U.S. and its allies were pulverized almost simultaneously. 30,000 elite troops, from high-ranking officers to frontline soldiers, were vaporized in the literal sense amid the storm of fire and reinforced concrete melted by the blasts. The destruction on the ground defies description. Multi-billion-dollar Patriot launchers stood charred and useless like broken toys. Advanced early warning radars were blinded, their screens filled with electronic noise before exploding under the shock waves. How could a multi-layered, high-tech air defense system built with the West's most advanced military technology be breached so humiliatingly and easily? The answer has delivered a fatal blow to the entire Western world's confidence. The weapons that claimed the lives of those 30,000 American troops were not purely Iranian in origin. Behind this lightning strike of annihilation, one could clearly smell the scorched signature of advanced ballistic technology from the Korean Peninsula, North Korea. This was the deadliest blind spot that the massive intelligence apparatus of the CIA and Mossad completely missed. Iran didn't just manufacture its own missiles. For years, through an incredibly sophisticated underground supply network, they had quietly received and integrated core technologies from Pyongyang. Variants resembling the KN-23 and Hwasong series maneuverable medium and short-range ballistic missiles capable of extreme terminal phase pull-up maneuvers had been transferred, disguised, and assembled deep inside Iran's mountain tunnels. American spy satellites were completely fooled. They were too busy monitoring open sea routes and ineffective financial sanctions, unaware that a high-tech Ho Chi Minh Trail version had been established across Eurasia. North Korean technology, combined with Iran's mass production capacity and fierce will to survive, created a swarm of monstrous firepower. These missiles didn't follow simple parabolic paths. They hopped, swerved, and made sudden direction changes in the final phase at hypersonic speeds, completely overwhelming and paralyzing Patriot and THAAD systems. The enormous psychological pressure right now falls on one man alone, the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump. Inside the Oval Office, the usual arrogant atmosphere of America First is gone. There are no more bombastic threats or declarations to wipe opponents off the map. The room is thick with dread. You can almost hear the irregular heartbeats of four-star generals. 30,000 bodies, 30,000 flag-draped coffins waiting to be sent home. This is not an ordinary wartime loss. It is a national catastrophe, a blow that has completely shattered America's will to fight. Trump, the old fox skilled in economics and raw pragmatism, has been backed into the worst corner of any president in history. A blind leader might have already ordered the nuclear football opened, but Trump is not stupid. His current silence carries a bitter, terrifying truth. America cannot and dare not respond with total war. Why? Because the moment they realized the North Korean derived missile technology was launched from Iranian platforms, Washington understood they were no longer facing isolated nations. A new power bloc had just flipped the table. Striking Iran now would mean declaring war on an entire resistance ecosystem backed by the major powers of Eurasia. Bombing Tehran would trigger responses from Pyongyang toward South Korea and Japan, from Russia and Eastern Europe, and from China tightening the noose around Taiwan and the South China Sea. America is exhausted. Its weapons stockpiles have been depleted after pouring resources into multiple global aid efforts. Facing an alliance willing to fight to the death, America's deterrent power has evaporated along with those 30,000 soldiers in the Gulf. For the first time in modern history, the world's number one superpower is tasting total helplessness. Urgent reports flood into the White House. European allies are calling in panic. Stock markets are counting down to opening bell, and a historic chain reaction collapse. Oil prices are poised to skyrocket to insane levels, threatening to cook the entire Western economy alive. Trump faces a civilization-ending choice. Trigger World War III, which America would almost certainly lose or swallow his pride, accept humiliating negotiations, and seek a dignified exit to save what remains of his political life and the collapsing economy. The board has been overturned. The empire is bleeding out. But while Washington is in chaos trying to clean up the ashes of 50 destroyed bases, an even more ruthless development has begun behind the scenes. A secure hotline in the White House suddenly rings. The encrypted signal doesn't come from Tel Aviv, London, or Paris. It originates from the heart of Eurasia, carrying a cold ultimatum that will decide the fate of hundreds of millions. The real monster has not yet shown its full face. The voice on the other end doesn't introduce itself, doesn't issue crude threats, and makes no negotiable demands. It is simply a cold, emotionless message delivered in flawless English from an untraceable relay station deep inside Eurasia. The board has been reset. Any shot fired by the Fifth Fleet, any B-2 Spirit leaving Diego Garcia, will immediately trigger a similar firestorm against American carrier groups and allied energy infrastructure. The choice is yours, Mr. President. A deathly silence fills the most secure underground room on the planet. Trump, the man who once held the power of life and death over the world, buries his face in his hands, staring blankly at the digital map flashing with blood-red markers. 30,000 American lives gone in the blink of an eye. This is not 30 or 300 deaths that can be covered up with dignified memorial services. This is systemic collapse. Tens of thousands of families across America will scream in despair. A nation already exhausted by endless wars will erupt in rage upon realizing their sons and daughters were mere paper targets against an alien, ruthless firepower. Pressure from both parties, Wall Street, and millions of voters is turning into a volcano ready to explode, threatening Trump's political survival and the future of the Republican Party. Hawkish generals covered in medals are banging tables, demanding preemptive strikes, nuclear bunker busters to flatten Tehran, demanding blood for blood. But Trump, with the survival instincts of an old wolf, smells a perfect trap. The Pentagon's fatal miscalculation over decades was always seeing itself as superior, accustomed to fighting from a distance, safely dropping bombs on weaker nations without real air defenses. This time, the opponent has transformed. The fusion of North Korean maneuverable ballistic technology and Iran's asymmetric dispersed warfare doctrine has exposed the greatest vulnerability of America's war machine, its cumbersome, expensive, and overly centralized nature. Look at the narrow Persian Gulf, once considered the U.S. Navy's backyard. Massive carrier strike groups floating steel fortresses worth over $10 billion each, carrying thousands of sailors, and advanced F-35s are now in a desperate situation. If land bases protected by dense Patriot and THAAD networks were turned to dust in 2 minutes, these slow-moving carriers in confined waters are nothing more than fat, stranded targets waiting to be slaughtered. Any sane naval commander understands. Once Aegis systems proved useless against North Korean-derived smart ballistic missiles, aircraft carriers are no longer power symbols. They have become giant floating coffins. Panic is unmistakable as red alerts are issued. U.S. fleets are frantically maneuvering to escape the Gulf, fleeing to deeper waters of the Arabian Sea to stay beyond the range of mobile launchers hidden in mountain caves along the Strait of Hormuz. The superpower's humiliation is on full display. This war is no longer about who has more bombs, but who can endure greater pain. The cards of the Eurasian axis have been revealed, and the geopolitical consequences are sending shockwaves through the entire power structure. Arab Gulf states, wealthy but vulnerable, are watching the massacre of American troops in horror. The illusion of Washington's security umbrella in exchange for petrodollars has been shredded. If America, with all its supreme power, could not protect its own soldiers from North Korean missiles in Iranian hands, how long would Saudi or UAE air defenses last 30 seconds? Secret flights are already leaving Arab capitals, carrying top envoys rushing toward Beijing and Moscow. Backroom deals are being made at frantic speed. These Middle Eastern nations realize that to survive in a fracturing world order, they cannot keep betting on a bleeding superpower that has lost its deterrent. They must switch sides, appease Tehran, and seek protection from those who actually control the missile technology dominating the board. The petrodollar is dying. The foundation of American economic power is being hollowed out not by financial attacks, but by the total collapse of its military credibility. The only language that once guaranteed the dollar's dominance raw power has failed. Trump is cornered, surrounded on all sides. Acknowledging defeat and seeking a diplomatic off-ramp to bring remaining troops home safely seems the only path to survival, even if it marks the end of the American empire. But just as he reaches for the phone to open a back channel through Oman or Switzerland, the global monitoring screens in the Pentagon flash red again. This time, the deadly trajectories are coming straight from the Negev desert. Benjamin Netanyahu, the lone and desperate wolf in Tel Aviv, has reached a cold conclusion after seeing America's slaughter and Trump's hesitation. Israel has been abandoned. The survival of the Jewish state is directly threatened by Washington's weakness. With Iron Dome missiles nearly depleted and North Korean-style rockets capable of hitting anywhere in Israel at any moment, the hardline Israeli government has decided to pull the trigger on Armageddon. The silos housing Jericho ballistic missiles, Israel's most secret nuclear-capable weapons, are opening. The Samson option, the doomsday plan to take the entire Middle East down with them, has been activated. The world order is not just fracturing, it is about to explode. Humanity's worst madness rarely comes from courage. It usually springs from utter despair. As the massive concrete silo lids in the Negev slide open, revealing the steel shapes of death, the world hears not just mechanical sounds, but the snapping of the final red line, the tearing apart of every treaty, every diplomatic effort, and every Western illusion of a rules-based order. The Samson option is not merely a military plan. It is the roar of a drowning man trying to drag all of civilization down with him. Netanyahu is not just aiming nuclear warheads at Tehran. This insane gamble is a gun pointed directly at Donald Trump and Washington's power structure. Either America joins the fight to save Israel, or the entire Middle East will be turned into a radioactive wasteland, dragging the global economy into the abyss with it. An unprecedented media shockwave swept newsrooms from New York to London. The Western propaganda machine, which once sold clean wars and surgical strikes, has collapsed into panic and silence. For the first time, Western citizens are being ripped from their comfortable slumber and forced to stare into the abyss of annihilation. Supermarket shelves in Europe and America were emptied within hours. Cold War era bunkers were reopened in chaos. The psychological warfare of the resistance axis has achieved a brilliant victory. They didn't need to drop a single bomb on American soil. The primal fear of nuclear war and the madness of their own ally Israel is tearing Western society apart from within. Yet even this fiery spectacle is only the visible tip of a much larger geopolitical iceberg. While Washington struggles to contain Tel Aviv's insanity, a second, quieter but equally devastating front has opened on a global scale. The battlefield has expanded beyond the sandy, bloody borders of the Middle East into financial markets, ports, and energy pipelines. Oil futures have shattered every record, surging toward $300 per barrel in the most insane trading session in history. Global supply chains, already fragile, have snapped completely. This is when the final dagger falls. While America and Europe drown in hyperinflation, a shadowy alliance seizes this once-in-a-millennium opportunity to shatter the last chains of American empire. In Moscow and Beijing, there is no panic, only cold, decisive nods. BRICS leaders don't launch military strikes. They unleash a meticulously prepared financial bomb. Exploiting Washington's extreme weakness and the Islamic world's fury over Israel's nuclear threat, BRICS fully activates its independent payment system, completely severing ties with Western SWIFT. The most lethal blow comes from Riyadh. Saudi Arabia, once the cornerstone of American superpower status, has turned its back after witnessing Washington's helplessness and Tel Aviv's extremism. On national television, the kingdom announces the permanent end of the petrodollar era. From now on, Gulf oil will be traded only in yuan, rubles, or physical gold through BRICS platforms. The unipolar world has drawn its last breath. Trillions of dollars in foreign reserves flee U.S. treasuries, turning the dollar into burning paper in the hands of the Federal Reserve. History's bitter irony. The very weapon of sanctions Washington once used to impoverish and subdue nations has now been turned against its creator. It is no longer America sanctioning the world. It is Eurasia and the global South erecting an iron wall around the West. Europe, which already cut itself off from cheap Russian energy, is now being strangled as Middle Eastern energy flows freeze due to war and new payment rules. German and French heavy industries declare mass bankruptcies. The proud industrial machine of Western capitalism is freezing to death in darkness and energy shortage. The arrogance of the Pentagon and White House politicians is being paid for with the total collapse of the macroeconomic structure they built since Bretton Woods. Trump is no longer just a commander who lost 30,000 troops. He stands atop the ashes of the world's largest economy. Military threats become laughable when the U.S. government faces technical default within weeks, unable to pay soldiers or maintain fleets. America is trapped in a multi-domain invisible war of unprecedented ferocity, its military neutralized by asymmetric firepower, its finances destroyed by the rise of a multipolar order, and its society fracturing under nuclear fear. Everything seems to have reached a dead end, a perfect trap laid by the coldest strategic minds of the East. But just as the world closes its eyes and prays for the flash of doomsday from the Middle East, the center of the board shifts again in an unimaginable direction. A top secret intelligence report marked doomsday level lands on Trump's desk. It is not about Israeli missile launches or fleeing capital. It contains freshly decoded satellite images from the Pacific Theater. On the eastern edge of the Eurasian landmass, which had been quietly watching the Gulf burn the greatest strategic peace, a sleeping giant has awakened and begun to move, carrying enough power to permanently crush America's hegemony on the world's most vital sea lanes. The real game has only now revealed its final trump card. If Israel's nuclear madness in the Negev is a spark ready to ignite the atmosphere, what is stirring on the eastern shores of Eurasia is an immense, cold, ruthless iceberg heading straight to rip open the hull of the Titanic called American hegemony. Imagine the moment when the Pentagon's already bleeding central nervous system is struck by another sledgehammer blow to its final vital point. Satellite images from Indo-PACOM do not show missiles flying or mushroom clouds. They show something far more terrifying, the awakening of a steel great wall of radars and firepower rising across the ocean. The Russian Pacific Fleet and the entire Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy plan have simultaneously set sail. Beijing and Moscow have chosen a perfectly terrifying moment. While the world's eyes, America's carrier groups and NATO forces are sucked into the nuclear black hole in the Middle East, on the other side of the globe, a second noose is tightened. No declaration of war, no shots fired. In just a few hours, an absolute air and sea denial zone, A2AD, has been established from the Kuril Islands in the north, covering the entire Taiwan Strait and extending into the South China Sea. Hundreds of warships, nuclear attack submarines, and J-20 stealth fighter squadrons have created a giant electromagnetic cage. Taiwan, once hailed by Washington as an impregnable democratic fortress, is now completely cut off from communication and supply lines, isolated like a blindfolded hostage awaiting execution. Why Taiwan? Why now? Strategists in Washington are screaming in despair because they understand the lethal nature of Beijing's move. If the Strait of Hormuz is the windpipe pumping oil into the global economy, Taiwan is the brain, the central nervous system controlling humanity's entire technological civilization. Over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors, the core components for everything from iPhones to F-35 processors and Patriot radars, are produced there. By tightening the steel encirclement around the island, China and Russia are not aiming at territory alone. They are driving an invisible knife straight into the technological throat of the West. Not a single chip is allowed to leave the island. America's defense industrial base, already hollowed out by global aid, now faces clinical death. The Pentagon can print trillions of paper dollars, but it cannot print chips for missile guidance systems. Panic spreads from the Oval Office to Wall Street. The NASDAQ center of America's knowledge economy is not merely declining, it is experiencing a historic bloodbath. Trillions in market value of tech giants evaporate in minutes. Defense stocks plunge. The Western financial elite, who once believed they could sanction the rest of the world into submission, are now frantically fleeing a collapsing market. American public opinion is shaken. The dream of comfortable, technology-filled lives is shattered, replaced by visions of empty shelves, shuttered factories, and the greatest depression since 1929. The naked truth is revealed. America is a giant with feet of clay, and Beijing has just smashed those feet with a hammer. The psychological pressure on Trump and his generals has now exceeded human limits. For decades, America's core military doctrine was built on the ability to fight and win 1.5 or 2 wars simultaneously. But that was when America was at its peak and its enemies were fragmented and weak. Now, the Pentagon's worst nightmare has become reality. They are being dragged into a three-front war: Russia crushing Eastern Europe, Iran and the Islamic resistance axis triggering nuclear crisis in the Middle East, and China locking down the Pacific. A perfectly coordinated symphony of destruction conducted from Beijing and Moscow. America is stretched on a giant geographic rack. Any struggle on one side only tightens the other. The risk of miscalculation is pushing humanity closer to the edge of extinction than ever before. On the waters of the Western Pacific, an American guided missile destroyer on a so-called freedom of navigation patrol suddenly finds itself surrounded by dozens of massive Chinese warships. Satellite communications are jammed. Radar screens are filled with false signals. In the cramped Combat Information Center, young American officers sweat coldly, fingers trembling over firing buttons. One wrong blink, one impulsive decision by a panicked captain, or one accidental laser sweep could ignite World War III. The world's most powerful military is experiencing a feeling it has never known: being the prey. Meanwhile, political divisions in Washington have turned into open civil war. Extremists in Congress demand Trump prove his resolve by sending carrier groups into the Chinese encirclement to rescue Taiwan while launching preemptive strikes on Iran to save Israel. But pragmatic intelligence voices slam the table, pointing out a cold reality. Any military escalation by America at this moment, whether in the Pacific or the Gulf, will be met with saturation hypersonic strikes against which Western defenses have proven completely helpless. Sending carriers to the Taiwan Strait now is not power projection. It is sending giant floating coffins carrying tens of thousands of sailors into a meat grinder. The collapse of confidence spreads like poison. Allies in Asia, Japan, South Korea watch in horror, realizing America's nuclear umbrella was an empty promise that cannot be honored when real creditors knock. Trump, who always prided himself on deal-making mastery, is now drowning in a suffocating, silent Oval Office. The position of global hegemon has slipped from America's hands, not because it lacked weapons, but because its opponents have completely surpassed it in the art of geopolitical warfare. The multipolar axis did not confront directly in a conventional battle. They used America's own weight, arrogance, and strategic mistakes to strangle it. BRICS created its own financial system. Hypersonic weapons, electronic warfare, and asymmetric tactics rendered Western air power obsolete. Allies were constrained, Israel committing suicide and dragging America with it, while Saudi Arabia turned away. The old order is not just cracking, it is shattering into pieces under a rising new power structure. Judgment Day looms over Washington. The countdown on Israeli Jericho missiles continues. The chip famine is strangling global technology supply chains. All of humanity holds its breath, waiting for the sound of breaking skies. But at the darkest moment of despair, when every leader's finger is on the doomsday button, an unprecedented media event occurs. All screens on the planet in the Oval Office, Western news networks, and billions of smartphones are simultaneously hijacked. A unified signal. A single message from an unknown location, three figures representing Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran appear before the cameras. The trial of the Western Empire has officially begun. The verdict is about to be delivered not with bombs, but with a new world order that has no place for Washington's dominance. History has permanently entered a new, darker, colder, yet brutally fair chapter. Imagine the surreal scene in Times Square, Piccadilly Circus, or Shibuya Crossing. Giant billboards that once pumped capitalist prosperity, green stock tickers, and smiling Western politicians suddenly go dark. A deathly silence spreads from personal devices to underground command centers. Then, against the black void, the three faces of the new power axis appear. No blood-stained uniforms, no screaming threats. They sit in a simple conference room, radiating absolute authority of those who now control the pulse of the planet. This is not an ordinary cyber attack by anonymous hackers. This is a godlike demonstration of cyber power, a devastating blow that breaks the spine of Western information systems. The fact that the Eurasian axis could so easily pierce the NSA's digital defenses and seize control of all global broadcasting sends a razor-sharp message. Your safe zone no longer exists. We control not only the physical battlefield, but your very perception of reality. In the Oval Office, Trump and his generals frantically try to disconnect systems, but all efforts fail. They are forced to sit, mouths agape, as helpless spectators at their own empire's death sentence. The proclamation does not use bombastic language. It is delivered in cold, precise, surgical tones that dissect every tumor of the old world order. The multipolar axis does not demand surrender from one nation. They are issuing an ultimatum to reshape the entire structure of humanity. The statement exposes Washington's hypocrisy and reveals that America's hegemony, with its unlimited money printing and global policeman carrier fleets, was the root of global instability. But the most psychologically devastating blow is their response to Israel's nuclear threat. The declaration shows no fear of Netanyahu's Samson option. Instead, they use Israel's madness as ironclad evidence before the court of international public opinion. Look who the real terrorists controlling the world are. This question lands like a slap across the face of Western moralists. The Eurasian Alliance declares they are conducting a genuine peacekeeping operation to disarm an extremist regime attempting to hold humanity hostage with nuclear weapons and to prove their absolute superiority. Live imagery is transmitted from space. On every screen, viewers see Israeli Jericho silos wide open, but the missiles inside are completely motionless. No launches have occurred. A horrifying truth is revealed, destroying Israel's last hope and paralyzing America's military leadership. Beijing and Moscow had secretly deployed low-orbit electromagnetic pulse (EMP) weapons and advanced quantum decryption algorithms, completely neutralizing Israel's nuclear command systems and electronic controls before Netanyahu could act. The ultimate nuclear deterrent, once Israel's final guardian, has been reduced to inert scrap metal in deep bunkers. The myth of Western military technological superiority has been shattered without mercy. They were not only outnumbered in firepower, they were completely outclassed in strategic thinking and space-age warfare. The Pentagon, in horror, realizes that while they were busy building expensive fighter jets to bomb Muslims, their real adversaries had built a space-based control network from the stars. With the West's final trump card torn apart, the chain reaction collapse accelerates beyond recovery. Europe fractures violently. Leaders in Paris and Berlin who once swore eternal transatlantic unity now tremble in their bunkers. Faced with the prospect of permanent cutoff of Middle Eastern energy, industrial collapse, and being dragged into a world war they cannot control, Europe turns its back. Secret hotlines shift from Washington to Moscow. European leaders begin begging for separate ceasefires, promising to withdraw from U.S.-led military alliances in exchange for energy and safety. The NATO shield, the greatest war machine in history, disintegrates from within. America is officially isolated on a giant geopolitical island. The decisive escalation phase unfolds, strangling every corner of economic life. On global exchanges, the dollar is no longer falling, it is being executed as BRICS fully activates its gold and commodities-backed independent payment system. Nations across the global south, India, Brazil, Southeast Asia, Africa, simultaneously abandon the dollar in the greatest financial migration in human history. Trillions in U.S. Treasury holdings are dumped back onto the Federal Reserve. America, a nation accustomed to living as a parasite on the world's labor through its currency privilege, now faces hyperinflation overnight. A $100 bill can no longer buy a loaf of bread in New York supermarkets. Banks lose liquidity, ATMs fail, riots and looting erupt from California to Washington, D.C. America is not destroyed by bombs, but torn apart by the very economic weapon it once wielded with pride. Every nation on earth is forced to choose sides. The choice has become crystal clear. No one wants to board a sinking ship with a captain who has lost the wheel. The Eurasian ultimatum gives Washington a brutally cold 4-8-hour deadline to sign the new Eurasian Treaty, essentially a death certificate for American military presence worldwide. Terms are razor sharp: complete withdrawal of carrier groups from the Western Pacific and South China Sea, dismantling of remaining bases in the Middle East, and acceptance of peaceful reunification of Taiwan with the mainland under Beijing's control. If the deadline passes without the U.S. president's signature, total reverse sanctions will be imposed, cutting off rare earth minerals, electronics components, and essential goods, while allowing the alliance to neutralize any remaining American military assets outside North America. The psychological pressure in the Oval Office has surpassed human endurance. Trump stands at the window, looking out at the White House lawn, shrouded in the gloom of raging protests. From a president who dreamed of making America great again, he has become the bearer of the most humiliating verdict in the history of the Republic. Signing the treaty would brand him a traitor in the eyes of hawks and militarists. Refusing would plunge the country into bloody civil war amid famine and chaos, while the Pacific Fleet is sent to the bottom by unstoppable hypersonic barrages. The brutal truth: the power of decision no longer rests with America. They are being forced to drink the poison they themselves brewed over decades of arrogance. The decisive moment is only heartbeats away. The giant digital countdown clock ticks relentlessly. Trump, with an aged face and trembling hands, slowly opens his desk drawer, takes out his familiar gold-plated pen, and prepares to either surrender or watch America burn. The eyes of the world hold their breath, fixed on the tip of that pen, but in that suffocating silence, a deep, guttural roar of absolute despair suddenly tears through the ocean depths. In an unmarked stretch of sea beyond all quantum surveillance, a Cold War-era ghost, an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine armed with 24 Trident II nuclear missiles which had lost contact with Strategic Command 2 weeks earlier, suddenly surfaces. American captain, eyes bloodshot with fanaticism and despair, refuses the surrender order. He refuses to watch his empire kneel. His hand slams down on the red launch button. Time itself seems to freeze in horror. When the mechanical roar of the Ohio-class submarine's launch system rips through the ocean's silence, the entire planet holds its breath. The massive steel behemoth breaks the surface in a column of water and fire. The launch order did not come from the president's nuclear football. It came from the madness of one individual, a captain driven to the edge by a dying empire's pride and desperation. The ballistic missiles, carrying multiple independently targetable warheads, streaked toward Eurasia, intending to drag the whole world down with the collapsing superpower. In the Oval Office, Trump drops the gold pen onto the oak desk. All diplomatic efforts, all bitter concessions he was about to make to save what remained of America, vanish in an instant. Doomsday-level air raid sirens wail across the Pentagon. Generals clutch their heads in despair. They understand nuclear game theory all too well. Once a missile is launched, whether by accident or intent, the opposing side's automated retaliation systems will respond immediately. There will be no clarifying phone calls, no forgiveness. Thousands of intercontinental ballistic missiles with thermonuclear warheads from Siberian silos and mobile launchers in China's Changbai Mountains will immediately launch, turning North America into a radioactive wasteland. Humanity's worst nightmare warned about since the Cold War is becoming reality on radar screens. But at that razor-thin moment between life and death, when the world prepares for nuclear rain, the true ultimate trump card and most terrifying deterrent of the multipolar axis is finally revealed, exposing a technological gap that can never be closed. From secret space facilities deep in the Gobi Desert and Russia's quantum military satellite stations, a silent space-based electromagnetic defense network activates. No ground-based interceptor missiles like the outdated Patriots. No saturation explosions. Instead, the moment the massive Trident II rises above the stratosphere into near-Earth orbit to begin warhead separation, a directed energy beam, a quantum, stealthy, lightning-fast weapon sweeps the target at the speed of light. A single flash appears at the edge of the atmosphere, cold and indifferent. The massive metal vehicle carrying nuclear death has its electronic guidance systems melted in a fraction of a second. Engines fail. Warheads are disabled. The entire weapon becomes a giant hunk of scrap tumbling harmlessly into the depths of the Pacific without any nuclear detonation. The world is saved not by American mercy, but by space defense technology that has surpassed Washington by a century. In the Pentagon's underground command center, horror is unmistakable. The sight of a nuclear missile being neutralized mid-flight is the final nail in the coffin of Western military pride. The Ohio-class submarine that surfaced is immediately targeted and destroyed by a swarm of supercavitating torpedoes from Russian unmanned submarines that had been silently shadowing it. The Empire's last card has been stripped away in the most humiliating and thorough manner. Now, with all illusions of absolute military supremacy torn away, the full picture of the New World Order emerges sharp and brutally honest. The failed nuclear strike by the desperate has served as the final hammer blow shattering America's remaining diplomatic credibility. Across European capitals, London, Paris, Berlin, Western leaders abandon all pretense of transatlantic solidarity. They race to sever ties with Washington and desperately send envoys to Beijing and Moscow, begging to join the new payment system, begging for energy and mercy. NATO history's greatest war machine does not dissolve by treaty. It collapses internally when members realize America's nuclear umbrella was a deadly illusion. The unipolar world order has been buried beneath the dust of history. Its consequences are sweeping through every layer of economics and social psychology. In America, the sentence has been carried out. The Federal Reserve's collapse and the dollar's loss of international reserve status have turned the world's largest economy into a battlefield of riots and internal division. States like Texas and California openly challenge federal authority, demanding economic autonomy to survive hyperinflation. Tens of thousands of American troops, stationed at hundreds of bases worldwide, have become orphaned forces, unpaid, unsupplied, forced to humiliatingly pack their bags onto civilian transport ships and return home. From the scorched deserts of the Middle East, where Saudi Arabia has now joined hands with Iran under Chinese mediation to establish a new Arab security bloc entirely free of American presence, to the turbulent waters of the Pacific, where once mighty U.S. carrier strike groups are quietly withdrawing under the watchful eyes of Chinese J-20 squadrons, the retreat of American power is unfolding on a truly global scale. Israel, Washington's most pampered and protected ally, now finds itself completely surrounded by economic and military pressure. It has been forced to accept full nuclear disarmament, dismantle its extremist settlements, and submit to a new peace treaty brokered under BRICS leadership. All the old rules have been rewritten. Every invisible line of power has been redrawn. The world has just witnessed the greatest transfer of global hegemony since the fall of the Roman Empire, yet this time it happened not over centuries, but in a matter of weeks, through cold strategic calculation and overwhelming firepower. Ladies and gentlemen, the game is over. No radioactive fallout rained down, but the dust of the old world order now blankets the halls of power in Washington. The era of trillion-dollar weapon systems, dollar dominance, and indiscriminate sanctions has officially come to an end, replaced by a multipolar world that is colder, more pragmatic, and far more balanced. The greatest lesson emerging from the blood and fire in the Gulf, from the devastating effectiveness of North Korean missiles, and from the iron grip of the Eurasian Axis is crystal clear. No empire lasts forever if it is built on injustice and arrogance. America did not fall because it lacked weapons. It collapsed because it was left behind in the evolution of modern warfare and strategic thinking. Its downfall is both a majestic and bitterly painful verdict, the final chapter of those who once declared themselves masters of the skies. If you can feel the pulse of history beating through these words, and if you want to continue uncovering the rawest, most unflinching truths hidden behind the sanitized narratives of Western media, then hit subscribe, drop a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. The sharpest analysis and most breathtaking scenarios are waiting for you in the next videos. See you in the next flashpoints of a world that is breaking apart and being reborn.